Thomas Mitchell stares at the mysterious pendant in his trembling hand, sunlight catching the inscription, "To my beloved sea, forever yours, R." After 43 years of marriage, he'd never given Caroline such a gift. His thumb traces the unfamiliar gold, memories of their anniversary celebrations flashing through his mind, now tainted with doubt. The hospital's antiseptic scent still clings to his clothes from collecting her personal effects this morning, mingling with the coffee gone cold beside him. His chest tightens, breath catching as the first sob breaks free. Has betrayal ever shattered your world? Share your story below, like if this pain feels familiar. Follow to see how Thomas rebuilds from heartbreak's ashes. The dining room chair, where Caroline sat every morning for decades, creaks as he slumps forward, tears falling onto the polished table where they'd shared thousands of meals. The grandfather clock ticks mercilessly, counting seconds of a life suddenly revealed as a stranger's. Thomas Mitchell's weathered hand trembled as it clutched Caroline's increasingly cold fingers in the ICU. The antiseptic smell stung his nostrils, burning eyes already raw from hours of silent tears. 43 years of marriage ending beneath the artificial twilight of dimmed fluorescent lights. Remember when we got caught in that thunderstorm at Yellowstone? His voice cracked mid-sentence, memories rushing back of Caroline laughing as they huddled under a single poncho, young and invincible, back when time stretched endless before them. The persistent mechanical hum of life support created a rhythm of false hope, each beep growing fainter. The monitors slowed. Caroline's breathing faltered. Thomas reached for the emergency button with trembling fingers, knocking over the water glass in his panic. A final tear fell onto their joined hands, making their wedding bands glisten momentarily in the dim light before soaking into the hospital sheet. Medical staff rushed in, a blur of scrubs and urgent voices. A nurse gently but firmly guided Thomas to the hallway corner, his legs nearly buckling beneath grief's sudden weight. He stood alone, watching through the window as strangers surrounded the woman who knew him better than he knew himself. Time slowed as the doctor finally emerged, face wearing that practiced, sympathetic expression. Thomas's world narrowed to a pinpoint, shoulders curving inward as if physically struck. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Mitchell." The words washed over him, meaningless sounds against the roaring in his ears. While struggling to compose himself, tissues disintegrating in his clenched fist, Thomas overheard two nurses whispering urgently around the corner. "He can never know what she was involved in," the younger one said, glancing nervously toward Thomas. "The files need to disappear before anyone checks," replied the older nurse. Dr. Kendall was explicit. Thomas approached them, vision clearing, as grief momentarily gave way to confusion. Both nurses fell silent immediately, exchanging meaningful glances before the younger one dropped her gaze guiltily and hurried away. "Is there something about my wife I should know?" Thomas asked, his journalist's instinct flickering to life beneath the grief. "No, Mr. Mitchell." The remaining nurse touched his arm with practiced compassion. "Just standard procedures. Let me get you some fresh water." As she walked away, Thomas noticed her reflection in the glass partition, her hand shaking slightly as she pulled out her phone, typing urgently. What were they hiding from him? And why did the younger nurse look almost guilty when she saw him watching them? For a moment, grief gave way to something Thomas hadn't felt in years: journalistic suspicion. The feeling was so unexpected, so incongruous with this moment of profound loss, that fresh tears sprang to his eyes. He'd come to say goodbye to his wife. Instead, he found himself wondering if he'd ever really known her at all. Thomas entered their empty home, fumbling with keys at the door. The hallway light flickered eerily against wedding photos that now seemed to watch him accusingly. 43 years of smiles. Were they all genuine? The house creaked with new emptiness, transforming familiar sounds into alien intrusions. Caroline's gardenia perfume lingered in the entryway from their morning goodbye, the scent now a ghost mocking his solitude. He collapsed in the entryway, jacket half removed, sobbing against the wall. The impact knocked a wedding photo from its hook, sending it crashing to the floor. Thomas stared at the cracked glass splitting Caroline's face, but leaving his intact. An unintentional metaphor he was too exhausted to contemplate. Can't be real. Can't be happening. Forcing himself upright, Thomas deliberately avoided their bedroom, shuffling instead to the kitchen. His hands moved automatically, making tea exactly as Caroline always did. 2 minutes steeping, splash of milk, no sugar. The kettle's whistle built to an unbearable shriek before he remembered to remove it from the heat. Muscle memory betraying him with its stubborn insistence on routines no longer relevant. He stared at her empty chair across the kitchen table, mug untouched, tears silently tracking down his lined face. The half-finished crossword sat precisely where she'd left it that morning, her distinctive handwriting now a relic. Caroline's reading glasses folded neatly beside it, waiting for a return that would never come. The anniversary clock, his gift for their 40th, ticked with merciless precision in the living room, marking time without her. His trembling fingertip traced Caroline's handwriting on the crossword, as if touching her through the marks she left behind. Tears blurred his vision, falling onto the paper and smudging the ink. "This can't be happening," he whispered to the empty room, voice hoarse from hours of hospital grief. The phone buzzing in his pocket startled him so violently he nearly fell. Probably one of their friends offering condolences. He pulled it out wearily, then froze. The screen showed Caroline with a new message. Thomas blinked hard, certain his grief was causing hallucinations. But the notification remained, sent 10 minutes ago, 4 hours after Caroline was declared dead. With shaking hands, he opened the text. "The children deserve the truth." The words made no sense. They'd never had children. In 43 years of marriage, that had been their one shared regret, the family they couldn't have together. His hands shook so violently that he dropped the phone on the table, tea spilling across Caroline's unfinished crossword, destroying her last normal activity. The hot liquid spread through the paper, words dissolving into unintelligible smears, just like the certainties of his life. Children. What children? Thomas stared at the phone as if it were a venomous snake. Either he was losing his mind in grief, or something impossible was happening. Or worse, something possible but unthinkable. The text mentioned children, but they'd never had any. That had been their shared sorrow. Or was that another lie? Thomas paced the kitchen until dawn, repeatedly checking the phone, sleepless and red-eyed. He tried calling Caroline's number 17 times. Each attempt met with voicemail, her recorded voice a knife twist of both comfort and torment. Technology glitches happened, but this felt deliberate. A message specifically crafted to shatter what little peace might have followed her death. As morning light filtered through the blinds, he made a decision. He needed answers. Starting with her personal effects from the hospital. He drove to the hospital with hands gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles whitened, twice missing turns on the familiar route, nearly running a red light in his distraction. The hospital looked different in daylight, less ominous, but more final, as if the night had allowed some small, irrational hope that morning dispelled completely. At the administration desk, He requested Caroline's belongings, his voice breaking mid-sentence when stating their relationship. "I'm her husband, Thomas Mitchell." The word husband caught in his throat. Was he still a husband without a wife? Or was he something else entirely? A widower? A fool? The indifferent clerk asked him to repeat himself, then directed him to wait in plastic chairs identical to those where he'd received the news of Caroline's death. 20 minutes later, Nurse Freeman, recognizable from the ICU, personally approached with a sealed plastic bag, her eyes deliberately avoiding his when handing it over. "I'm very sorry for your loss, Mr. Mitchell," she murmured, the standard phrase somehow weighted with additional meaning. Thomas nodded stiffly, taking the bag to a quiet corner of the lobby. Hospital corridors echoed with squeaking floor tiles, creating a sense of exposure and vulnerability. The antiseptic smell, merely clinical yesterday, now nauseated him, triggering fresh grief memories. Muted conversations behind closed doors heightened his growing paranoia that everyone knew something he didn't. With fingers visibly trembling, he opened the personal effects bag, hospital lighting glinting off his wedding band. Inside lay Caroline's familiar possessions: wedding ring, watch, earrings he'd given her for their 35th anniversary. But nestled among them gleamed something unfamiliar, a gold pendant on a delicate chain. "This isn't mine," he whispered, confusion etching deeper lines into his face. He'd never seen this pendant before, certainly never given it to Caroline. Holding it up, he examined it under the harsh hospital lights. Expensive, well worn. Clearly a treasured possession. The pendant caught light as it dangled from his fingers, an elegant oval locket. He fumbled with the tiny clasp, finally opening it to find no photo inside, just an inscription. "To my beloved C, forever yours, R." Thomas stared, uncomprehending. His name wasn't R. In 43 years, he'd never given Caroline anything with this inscription. His thumb traced the elegant engraving, memories of their anniversary celebrations flashing through his mind, now tainted with doubt. He sought out Nurse Freeman at the nurse's station, holding up the pendant. "This was with my wife's things. I've never seen it before." He watched her face carefully. "And last night, after she died, I received a text from her phone." Nurse Freeman's expression flickered with unmistakable guilt before she composed herself. "I don't know anything about a text, Mr. Mitchell." "What about this?" He dangled the pendant. "Or the children the text mentioned?" She glanced around nervously. "Mr. Mitchell, sometimes people keep secrets to protect those they love." She squeezed his arm gently before hurrying away. As Thomas turned to leave, Nurse Freeman called after him, "Mr. Mitchell, sometimes people keep secrets to protect those they love." What exactly did she know about Caroline? And who was R, the person who had apparently shared his wife's love for years? Thomas pocketed the pendant rather than returning it to the bag, a deliberate act showing transition from passive grief to active investigation. The physical evidence of unknown jewelry created the first concrete tears of betrayal, undermining cherished memories and questioning 4 decades of believed fidelity. The floor seemed to tilt beneath him as he walked toward the exit. The hospital corridor stretched impossibly long, like the questions now unspooling before him. Thomas transformed his home office into an investigation center, methodically spreading items from the hospital bag across his desk. The pendant held center stage, catching light beneath his desk lamp as he opened a journalist's notebook unused since retirement. His fingers remembered the motion, muscle memory returning like an old friend as he documented everything. The text message, the nurse's whispers, the pendant's inscription. "To my beloved C, forever yours, R." He stared at the elegant script, tracing each curve of the letters. Who was R, and what connection did they have to the mysterious children from the text? By mid-morning, Thomas had located the jeweler whose mark was stamped on the pendant's clasp, an exclusive shop downtown that had been in business for decades. Changing from his rumpled clothes into a pressed shirt, he drove there with the pendant secure in his pocket. The silver-haired saleswoman recognized the piece immediately. Oh yes, one of Dr. Kendall's annual gifts to his lady. Beautiful taste, that man. Thomas maintained his composure with effort. Dr. Kendall, you said? Dr. Robert Kendall, prominent physician, very generous. Buys something each year for his Caroline's birthday. She smiled. Such devotion after all these years. His Caroline. Thomas thanked the woman and left before his expression betrayed him, hands shaking as he gripped the steering wheel. Back home, with renewed purpose, Thomas searched their bedroom closet. Behind Caroline's winter sweaters, he found a laptop he'd never seen before, password protected and clearly kept hidden. The betrayal deepened with each discovery. He sat at the dining table where they'd celebrated 40 anniversaries and tried every password he could think of. Their anniversary date, her birthday, the names of her parents. All failed. In desperation, he typed Michael 1982, the name of his father who had died that year. The screen unlocked. Thomas's breath caught as a trove of secrets opened before him. A hidden email account filled with decades of correspondence between Caroline and Dr. Robert Kendall. Recent messages referenced tensions over foundation procedures and protecting M. Financial records showed regular payments to someone named Michael Kendall since 1982, plus offshore account transfers. His journalist's instinct sharpening through grief, Thomas discovered a safety deposit box key in Caroline's jewelry box's hidden compartment, a compartment he'd never known existed in 43 years of marriage. The bank manager recognized him as Caroline's husband and granted access after verifying their joint account status. Inside the box lay the final betrayal, a birth certificate and chronological photos of Caroline with Dr. Kendall and a child who grew into a man now in his early 40s. Their expressions in the photos were happy, familiar, intimate, a complete family unit. Thomas's hands shook violently as he spread the photos across their dining table. Photos of Michael growing up during the same years Thomas believed their childless state was their shared sorrow. School photos, birthday celebrations, graduation, even recent holidays, a complete parallel life documented in meticulous detail. Rage overtook him. Thomas hurled their framed wedding photo against the wall, glass shattering as he heaved with angry sobs, decades of memories literally broken at his feet. 43 years, he repeated between ragged breaths, pounding his fist against the desk. 43 years of lies. The birth certificate told the final truth, laid bare in black and white. Michael Robert Kendall, born to Caroline Mitchell and Robert Kendall, dated just 2 years after Thomas and Caroline's wedding. Their marriage had never been what he thought, not for a single day. The child they couldn't have existed all along, raised by another man, his wife's secret son with her secret lover. Standing in the shower fully clothed, Thomas let hot water mix with his tears, shoulders heaving with uncontrollable sobs that finally broke through his investigative detachment. The water couldn't wash away the fundamental question. If this basic truth of their life together had been a lie, what else had Caroline hidden? And what were the foundation procedures Caroline and Kendall had argued about in recent emails? Something about them had troubled Caroline enough to cause tension with her lover. Something about children, plural, not just their son. Thomas emerged from the shower, changed clothes, and returned to the dining room. Dripping photos and documents now covered every surface, his past dissolving while a new, terrible reality crystallized. Journalist instincts fully awakened, he began organizing the evidence chronologically, preparing to uncover the full extent of his wife's deception. The betrayal was no longer just personal. Something larger lurked beneath the surface, something involving foundation procedures and children who deserved the truth. And Thomas Mitchell intended to find it. Thomas researched Dr. Robert Kendall with methodical precision, learning he was director of the prestigious Kendall Medical Foundation, specializing in experimental treatments for terminal childhood diseases. The foundation's website featured glowing testimonials from grateful parents and images of smiling children, alongside photos of Dr. Kendall receiving humanitarian awards. In several photos, barely noticeable in the background, stood Caroline, always professionally dressed, always slightly out of focus, but unmistakably present at foundation events spanning decades. Thomas drove to the public library, where his old press credentials still carried weight with the reference librarian. She granted him access to archived newspapers and medical journal databases, setting him up with a microfiche reader in a quiet corner. "Research for a book," he explained when she commented on his intensity, "about medical ethics." Hour after hour, Thomas scrolled through archived articles, building a timeline. The Kendall Foundation had begun as a legitimate research organization, but approximately 15 years ago, patterns emerged. Controversial trial protocols, questions about oversight, unusual success claims, and repeatedly, though never prominently, Caroline's name appeared as an authorizing physician. But she wasn't a doctor, Thomas whispered to himself, hands trembling as he made photocopies. Caroline had been a hospital administrator with a business degree, not a medical professional. She had no qualifications to approve experimental procedures. By late afternoon, his eyes burning from the microfiche reader's glare, Thomas uncovered the pattern that made his stomach lurch. Children with terminal diagnoses enrolled in experimental trials, often making miraculous initial improvements, then suffering catastrophic declines. Deaths consistently attributed to their underlying conditions, not the treatments. The families were always poor, desperate, often immigrants with limited English, people unlikely to question authority or navigate complex medical bureaucracy. In a medical journal database, Thomas found a foundation document with Caroline's signature authorizing experimental procedures without standard oversight, explicitly bypassing ethics requirements with falsified credentials. The official-looking paperwork could easily fool desperate parents seeking hope for dying children. Following the financial trail, he discovered millions flowing to offshore accounts connected to foundation leadership, including Kendall and, indirectly, Caroline through hidden accounts. The foundation solicited donations for childhood cancer research while running unregulated human trials. The realization hit Thomas like a physical blow. His wife hadn't just betrayed him personally. She'd participated in exploiting vulnerable children for profit. The bathroom seemed miles away as he staggered toward it, barely making it to a stall before violent nausea overwhelmed him. Forehead pressed against the cool metal partition, his entire body shook uncontrollably. "My God, Caroline, what did you do?" he whispered, voice broken, the words both accusation and desperate plea for some explanation that could make sense of this horror. When he finally emerged, he caught his reflection in the bathroom mirror, a man aged years and days, eyes red-rimmed and hollow, posture collapsed. He barely recognized himself. Returning to his research table, his hands trembled so severely he dropped a crucial document, having to crawl under the table to retrieve it. An elderly man on hands and knees in public, dignity abandoned in pursuit of unbearable truth. An elderly library patron approached. "Sir, are you all right? Do you need medical help?" Thomas shook his head, unable to explain that his illness came from discoveries no doctor could treat. He gathered his materials and left, finding himself on a park bench outside the library as dusk fell. Tears had dried on his hollowed face as he stared into the middle distance, photocopied evidence clutched in lifeless fingers. The authorization signature on the illegal trial documents matched Caroline's perfectly. His wife had knowingly approved experiments on dying children. Unless, was she being coerced somehow? And if she was, why had she never turned to him for help during 43 years of supposed trust? The text message now made terrible sense. The children deserve the truth. Not just Michael, their secret son, but all the children exploited by the Foundation. Thomas sat motionless as darkness fell around him. A man whose entire moral universe had collapsed. The wife he'd loved for over 4 decades wasn't just an unfaithful partner. She was complicit in something monstrous. Has betrayal ever left you frozen in disbelief? Share your moment of devastating truth below. Like if this pain feels familiar, follow to see how Thomas finds his way through this darkness to purpose. Thomas returned to the hospital the next morning, folder of evidence tucked firmly under his arm. Grief had hardened into purpose overnight, giving him a clarity that cut through exhaustion. He waited at the nurse's station until Nurse Freeman appeared, then stepped directly into her path. "I need to speak with you," he said quietly, voice steady despite his internal turmoil. "About Caroline, the text message, and the Kendall Foundation." Her eyes widened with alarm. She glanced around nervously before whispering, "Not here. Chapel, 3rd floor, 15 minutes. Thomas found the hospital chapel empty, stained glass casting colored shadows across vacant pews. The space felt appropriate for confronting terrible truths, a sanctuary for confession. He sat stiffly, arranging his evidence folder on his lap, waiting. When the door opened, Nurse Freeman entered, accompanied by an older Asian woman in a white coat, her hospital ID identifying her as Dr. Sarah Chen. "This is risky," Nurse Freeman said, checking for others before sitting. "But you deserve answers." "I sent the text," she admitted, meeting his eyes directly. "From Caroline's phone after she died. She made me promise." Thomas's hands tightened around the folder. "What did she tell you?" "She knew she was dying," Nurse Freeman explained. "That last day, when you stepped out to get coffee, she grabbed my hand, said, 'Tell him I'm sorry. He deserves the truth about the children. It's all in the files.'" Dr. Chen leaned forward, arthritis-swollen knuckles clasped tightly together. "I worked with Caroline for years. She appeared increasingly distressed these past months, especially after a child named Jamie died unexpectedly during a trial. She began collecting documentation," Dr. Chen continued, passing Thomas a flash drive. "Evidence against the Foundation. I helped her. We were building a case." "But Caroline wasn't a doctor," Thomas said. "Her signature authorized experimental procedures." Dr. Chen nodded grimly. "Her credentials were falsified by Kendall. She did have medical training earlier in life, though she never completed her degree. Enough knowledge to seem credible on paperwork desperate parents wouldn't scrutinize." "Why?" Thomas asked, the question encompassing everything: the affair, the secret child, the Foundation, the lies. Nurse Freeman and Dr. Chen exchanged glances. "Blackmail, we think," Dr. Chen said finally. Caroline tried to leave Kendall years ago when the foundation began changing its protocols. He threatened to expose their relationship, their son, destroy both her marriages and her career. "And Michael?" Thomas asked. "He doesn't know about the foundation's activities," Dr. Chen replied. "Kendall kept him separate from that side of things. He's an investigative journalist now." "Like me," Thomas interjected softly. "Yes," she said. Caroline once mentioned the irony, but when she started gathering evidence against the foundation, she was also protecting Michael. Kendall would use anyone as leverage, even his own son. Thomas wiped away tears as understanding dawned. Caroline had been trapped between impossible choices, bound by decades of lies that began with infidelity but evolved into something far more sinister. "In these last months," Dr. Chen continued, "Caroline was planning to expose everything. She'd collected enough evidence to bring down the foundation, Kendall, everything. Then she became suddenly ill. Very suddenly." The implication hung heavy in the chapel's still air. "I'm not saying it wasn't natural causes," Dr. Chen said carefully, "but her death was certainly convenient for some people. And she was getting close to exposing everything." Thomas stared at the colored light playing across his hands. "She never told me," he whispered. "In 43 years, she never asked for my help." Nurse Freeman touched his arm gently. "She said she couldn't bear to destroy your image of her, that living with your belief in her goodness was both her comfort and her penance." The three sat in silence, hospital sounds muffled beyond the chapel door. Finally, Thomas straightened his shoulders as resolve visibly replaced despair. He wiped final tears before nodding decisively. "Then I'll finish what she started." Thomas turned his hospital ID badge backward, a symbolic rejection of institutional loyalty. Dr. Chen and Nurse Freeman did the same. An impromptu alliance formed in the colored light of the chapel. "We'll help," Dr. Chen said, "but there's someone else you should talk to first." She handed Thomas a folded paper. "Your wife's son, Michael Kendall. He's been investigating his father's foundation himself, though he doesn't know the full scope. Caroline wanted to tell him everything, but ran out of time." Thomas stared at the address written in Dr. Chen's precise handwriting. Caroline's son, his wife's child with another man, the family she'd hidden for decades. "He deserves the truth, too," Thomas said finally, tucking the paper into his pocket. As they left the chapel, Thomas felt something shift within him, grief transforming into purpose. Caroline's final act hadn't been betrayal, but an attempt at atonement. Now he would complete what she began for all the children who deserved the truth. Thomas located Michael Kendall's address through Dr. Chen's information, confirming it through his own investigative skills. A quick internet search revealed Michael worked as an investigative journalist for the city's most respected newspaper, specializing in medical ethics exposés, ironically similar to Thomas's own career before retirement. The apartment building was upscale, modern glass and steel in the fashionable downtown district. Thomas sat in his car outside, organizing photographs and evidence in a folder, occasionally wiping tears as he prepared to meet his wife's son. The photographs he'd selected spanned Michael's childhood, alongside documentation of the foundation's activities, truth on all fronts. After 30 minutes of rehearsing his approach, Thomas finally walked to the entrance, heart pounding. The doorman called up, and moments later, Thomas stood before apartment 714, knuckles hovering over the door. When it opened, Thomas found himself speechless. Caroline's eyes looked back at him from a younger man's face, the same distinctive hazel shade with flecks of gold near the pupil. Michael had her high cheekbones, her way of tilting his head slightly when assessing a stranger. The resemblance hit Thomas with physical force. "Yes?" Michael asked, wariness evident in his posture. Thomas cleared his throat. "My name is Thomas Mitchell. I was Caroline Mitchell's husband." Michael's expression hardened instantly, shoulders squaring defensively. "I know who you are. If you're here about money or revenge—" "I'm here about the Kendall Foundation," Thomas interrupted, keeping his voice steady, "and about the text message from your mother's phone after her death." Confusion flickered across Michael's face. "What text message?" Instead of answering directly, Thomas held out a folder. "I think you should see this." Not as Caroline's husband speaking to her son, but as one journalist to another. Michael hesitated, then accepted the folder. His eyes widened as he scanned the contents. "How did you get this information?" "I've been investigating the foundation for months and couldn't access half of these records." "Your mother collected them," Thomas said quietly, "before she died." Michael's professional composure cracked. "My mother knew about this, the trials, the falsified results." "We should talk somewhere else," Thomas suggested, noticing Michael's neighbors emerging from a nearby apartment. "Perhaps somewhere more appropriate." 2 hours later, they stood on opposite sides of Caroline's grave in Oakwood Cemetery. Thomas had chosen the location deliberately for its emotional impact. The peaceful grounds created neutral territory, marble headstone catching afternoon light between them like a physical manifestation of their connection. Birds sang with incongruous cheerfulness amid their tense conversation. Thomas had placed fresh flowers before Michael arrived. Now they wilted slightly in the spring warmth, symbolic of the fading but still present love Thomas felt for a woman he was only beginning to understand. "She never told me about you either," Michael said, with a bitter laugh that masked a lifetime of questions about his mother's divided loyalty. His hands remained shoved deep in his pockets. "I knew she had another life, another husband. Dad, Robert, made that clear, but she never explained why she stayed with you." "I never knew she had a son," Thomas replied. "She told me we couldn't have children. That was our shared sorrow for 43 years. Michael looked away. "While she was raising me with him." "Jesus." "What matters now," Thomas said, steering the conversation back to purpose, "is what the foundation is doing and what your father's role is in it." Michael reluctantly showed Thomas his press credentials. "I've been investigating medical research ethics violations for 3 years. Started focusing on the foundation 6 months ago after noticing irregularities in their trial protocols. Dad always kept me away from the foundation's operations. Now I understand why." As Michael described his investigation approach, Thomas recognized the methodical methodology, exactly how he would have tackled it himself. Despite everything, a small flicker of pride emerged at seeing his own professional values reflected in this stranger who was, in some bizarre way, family. "I have sources inside, but not high enough level to access the trial documentation you have," Michael continued. "With this evidence, plus my contacts—" He trailed off, professional excitement tempered by personal horror. "We can stop them," Thomas finished. "Together." They stood in silence, two strangers with identical determined expressions, recognizing shared purpose despite painful circumstances, professional respect beginning to bridge personal pain. "As a journalist, I should disclose my personal connection to this story to my editor," Michael said finally, ethical framework asserting itself. "But we can work this together. Your documentation, my inside sources." Thomas nodded. "There's a board meeting tomorrow. Dr. Chen says Kendall will be presenting new trial protocols for approval. Perfect timing, Michael replied, journalist instincts fully engaged. If we present the evidence there, with board members as witnesses, your father can't bury it, Thomas concluded. As they discussed strategy, Thomas noticed both of them unconsciously using the same distinctive hand gesture when emphasizing points, a genetic connection visible despite separate upbringings. Caroline lived on through Michael in ways Thomas had never imagined possible. She named you after my father, Thomas said suddenly. Michael, he died in 1982, the year you were born. Michael looked startled. She never explained my name. Just said she liked it. The revelation hung between them. A small act of connection across Caroline's divided worlds. A private acknowledgement of the husband who never knew his wife carried another man's child. Was this strange mirror image man actually Caroline's gift rather than her betrayal? Thomas wondered. And what did it mean that she'd named her secret son after Thomas's father? When your world falls apart, do you collapse or find strength to rebuild? Comment with your turning point moment, like if you've stood at this crossroads. Follow to witness Thomas confront those who thought him powerless. Thomas and Michael worked through the night, combining decades of journalistic experience with youthful digital savvy. They organized the evidence chronologically, cross-referenced financial records with trial documents, and prepared a presentation that would be impossible to dismiss. Dr. Chen provided the Foundation's board meeting schedule and security bypass codes, while Nurse Freeman contributed additional witness statements from hospital staff. By dawn, they had compiled a comprehensive dossier against the Foundation. Irrefutable evidence of fraudulent trials, falsified credentials, and financial malfeasance spanning 15 years. We'll need copies, Thomas said, arranging for the documents to be securely stored with 3 separate attorneys. And I've already filed reports with the Medical Licensing Board, State Attorney General, and FBI. Michael looked impressed. You don't take chances. I spent 40 years exposing corruption, Thomas replied. The powerful don't surrender easily. They arrived at the Kendall Medical Foundation 30 minutes before the scheduled board meeting. The modern glass building gleamed in morning sunlight, prestigious awards visible in the lobby display cases. Thomas felt a cold determination replace his earlier grief and rage. This was familiar territory, speaking truth to power, a purpose that had defined his career. Security guards recognized Michael as Dr. Kendall's son, allowing them upstairs without question. They waited in an adjacent conference room until they heard board members arriving. Thomas straightened his tie, hand briefly touching the pendant in his pocket, a reminder of why they were there. Michael adjusted his press credentials, looking simultaneously professional and apprehensive. Ready? Thomas asked. Michael nodded. Let's finish what she started. They entered the boardroom together, interrupting Dr. Kendall mid-sentence. 12 board members in expensive suits looked up in confusion. Robert Kendall froze when he saw them, especially the united front of father and son. Michael, what are you doing here? And with him? Kendall recovered quickly, smoothing his expression into professional concern. Mr. Mitchell, this is a private meeting. I understand you're grieving, but we're here about the children, Thomas said, voice steady and clear. All of them. Confusion rippled through the board members. Michael stepped forward, placing flash drives before each person. Ladies and gentlemen of the board, I'm Michael Kendall, investigative journalist with the Tribune. And this is Thomas Mitchell, retired investigative journalist and widower of Caroline Mitchell, who worked with this foundation for decades. Michael, Dr. Kendall warned, this is inappropriate. What's inappropriate? Thomas interrupted, sliding documented evidence methodically across the polished table, are experimental procedures performed on dying children without proper oversight or informed consent. Board members began examining the documents, expressions shifting from annoyance to concern. "Mr. Mitchell is clearly confused by grief," Kendall attempted, addressing the board chairwoman. "His wife recently passed, and he's fabricated this conspiracy to—" "My investigative skills didn't retire when I did," Thomas stated with quiet dignity, silencing Kendall's patronizing dismissal. "Every document before you has been authenticated, every financial record verified." "This is absurd," Kendall sputtered, face reddening. "He's an elderly man traumatized by loss, making wild accusations." "I can confirm these documents' authenticity," came a voice from the doorway. Dr. Chen entered, followed by 3 more whistleblowers in medical coats. "I've worked with the Foundation for 12 years and witnessed the protocol violations firsthand." The board chairwoman examined the financial records closely. "Dr. Kendall, these offshore accounts—" "This is a coordinated attack on the Foundation's reputation," Kendall insisted, desperation entering his voice. "Mitchell is jealous. He discovered Caroline and I had a son together," Thomas finished calmly. "Yes, I know about Michael. This isn't about personal betrayal, Dr. Kendall. It's about children who died while you profited from their parents' desperation." Board members exchanged alarmed glances, whispering among themselves as they reviewed evidence of clinical trials with falsified results, unauthorized procedures, and millions diverted to private accounts. "Caroline was gathering this evidence before her death," Michael stated, his professional demeanor cracking slightly. "Did you know that, Dad? She was building a case against you." Dr. Kendall's face drained of color as he realized the extent of evidence compiled against him. His eyes darted to exits as security guards appeared in the doorway. But these weren't Foundation security. "Dr. Robert Kendall?" A police detective stepped forward, badge extended. "We have warrants to search these premises and seize Foundation records. We'd also like you to accompany us downtown for questioning regarding financial fraud and medical ethics violations." Thomas stood tall, with Michael beside him, as police entered, years of stooped grief visibly falling away as justice approached. Tears of vindication glistened in his eyes, but remained controlled, dignity fully reclaimed. As officers led Dr. Kendall away, he looked at Thomas with naked hatred. "She never loved you like she loved me." Thomas responded with calm certainty. "But I loved her enough to finish what she started." He watched understanding dawn in Kendall's eyes. Caroline had been gathering evidence all along. The final betrayal was hers against Kendall, not against Thomas. Board members crowded around Thomas and Michael, asking questions, examining evidence, expressions shocked at their organization's corruption. Several immediately tendered resignations, while others promised cooperation with authorities. The chairwoman approached Thomas directly. "Mr. Mitchell, the board had no knowledge of these activities. We'll cooperate fully with investigations and make this right, for the families, for the children." Thomas nodded, witnessing the beginning of accountability. The Foundation's corruption was exposed, its director facing justice, its victims finally receiving acknowledgement. Looking around the boardroom, Thomas noticed board members glancing between him and Michael, noting their similar mannerisms and Michael's unmistakable resemblance to Caroline. Whispers spread as they drew obvious conclusions about decades of deception. But none of that mattered now. What mattered was truth. For the exploited families, for Michael, and for Thomas himself. Caroline's final message had led to justice, her last act an attempt at redemption. As reporters began arriving, alerted by Michael's editor, Thomas stepped back, allowing Michael to handle the press briefing. He watched with unexpected pride as Caroline's son managed the unfolding story with professional precision, establishing himself as a journalist of integrity despite his father's crimes. In that moment, Thomas realized Caroline had given him something unexpected after all. Not the children they couldn't have together, but this connection to her son, a fellow seeker of truth carrying forward the work that had defined Thomas's own life. 3 months later, Thomas sat on his front porch swing, watching evening descend over the neighborhood. The creaking swing moved gently in the evening breeze, creating a rhythmic comfort that had been absent from his life since Caroline's death. His posture was noticeably more relaxed than in the painful days following her passing, shoulders no longer hunched with grief and betrayal, face softened by purpose rather than hardened by anger. Beside him lay the morning's newspaper, folded to highlight the headline, "Kendall Foundation Restructured, New Ethical Oversight Committee Established." The article detailed the foundation's transformation under court-mandated reforms, with Thomas Mitchell listed as a civilian oversight consultant. He'd carefully clipped the piece for his growing scrapbook of impact, tangible evidence that justice could prevail. Thomas picked up an envelope that had arrived that morning, its contents bringing tears to his eyes for reasons entirely different than those of recent months. Inside were letters and photographs from families of children affected by the Foundation's trials, not just victims, but survivors now receiving proper care and compensation through the settlement fund. "Your wife would be proud," one mother had written. "Our Jamie didn't die in vain after all." Jamie, the child whose death had apparently triggered Caroline's final push to gather evidence. Thomas added the letter to his collection, feeling the weight of these connections to lives he'd never known were intertwined with his own. The sound of an approaching car drew his attention. Michael's distinctive blue sedan pulled into the driveway, right on time for their weekly dinner. These meetings had evolved from awkward alliance to cautious friendship over recent weeks, each man gradually lowering defenses built through shock and grief. Michael approached, carrying grocery bags. "Hope you're okay with pasta. I brought that sauce you liked last time." Thomas nodded, rising to help. "Sounds perfect." In the kitchen, once the domain of Caroline's routines, they moved with increasing comfort around each other. Michael chopped vegetables while Thomas set the table, their conversation flowing more naturally than in earlier tension-filled encounters. "The Ethics Committee approved the new trial protocols," Michael reported. "Completely transparent process, independent oversight, actually helping kids now, not exploiting them." "Good," Thomas replied simply. The Foundation, restructured under court supervision, now operated with legitimate medical research practices. Robert Kendall awaited trial from detention, bail denied due to flight risk, his reputation and career destroyed by his own actions. After dinner, Thomas led Michael to his office, where he'd gathered mementos from his journalistic career, awards, significant exposés, photographs with notable figures from decades in the field. "Found these while cleaning out some boxes," Thomas explained, handing Michael several framed certificates. "Thought you might find them interesting. Journalism awards from when I was about your age." Michael examined them with professional appreciation. "The Garrison Prize. That's impressive. They've only given 12 of these in 50 years. Your mother kept track of my career," Thomas said quietly. "I found clippings of all my major stories in her papers. Even during everything else, she followed my work." Michael nodded, processing this new facet of his mother's complicated life. "She encouraged my interest in journalism, said I had a natural instinct for uncovering truth." He paused. "I never made the connection to you. She kept our worlds carefully separated, Thomas acknowledged without bitterness. Understanding had gradually replaced anger as he'd pieced together Caroline's impossible situation. Trapped by early choices that spiraled beyond her control, protecting both families in the only ways she could imagine. "I'm continuing the investigation into similar research foundations," Michael said, accepting the unspoken offer of professional mentorship. "Your approach to the financial tracking was particularly effective. I'd appreciate your input on methodology." Thomas nodded, recognizing the olive branch extended between them, professional respect evolving into something more personal, yet still safely bounded by shared purpose. Later, after Michael left with promises to return the following week, Thomas sat alone on his porch swing. The garden Caroline had planted bloomed under his care, continuing despite her absence. Distant neighborhood sounds created a backdrop to his thoughts, rather than emphasizing lonely silence as they once had. He removed his wedding ring, studying the indentation from 43 years of wear. Tears fell, but his face remained serene with acceptance rather than contorted by despair. The ring went into a keepsake box alongside the pendant, symbols of Caroline's divided life now resting together, neither denied nor enshrined. Thomas understood now that he'd never fully known Caroline, but perhaps no one ever fully knows another person. She had loved him in her way, while carrying impossible secrets. Her final act had been to entrust him with the truth, believing in his strength to pursue justice when she no longer could. As Michael's car disappeared down the street, Thomas reflected on the unexpected turns life could take. 3 months ago, he'd lost his wife and discovered decades of betrayal. Now he'd found purpose in advocacy for exploited families and an unexpected connection with Caroline's son, a fellow journalist who somehow bridged Thomas's past and future. "Same time next week?" Michael had asked before leaving. "I found some of Mom's old articles from her journalism days before. Everything. Thought you might want to see them." Thomas had nodded, feeling something unexpected. Curiosity about tomorrow, about piecing together the complex woman who had been his wife, about forging a relationship with her son that honored truth rather than perpetuating deception. The evening star appeared above the horizon as darkness settled. Thomas watched it with peaceful contemplation, no longer drowning in grief, but navigating its currents with newfound purpose. Caroline was gone, her secrets revealed, her redemption incomplete but genuine. What remained was the truth, painful, complex, but ultimately liberating, and the choice of what to build from its foundation. You know that moment when life splits in two, the before and after. The instant when what you thought was solid ground dissolves beneath your feet. Thomas felt it at that hospital bedside, watching machines track Caroline's final heartbeats, and I suspect you felt something similar in your own life. Maybe not with the exact circumstances, but that same sickening lurch when trust shatters like a glass dropped on a kitchen floor. We've all been betrayed, haven't we, folks? Maybe by a spouse, a child, a friend, or a system we believed would protect us. That hollow feeling in your chest, like someone scooped out everything that made sense and left nothing but questions behind. The way tears come at odd moments, stirring soup on the stove, folding laundry still warm from the dryer, sitting in a car at a red light that seems to last forever. The disbelief that can keep you pacing kitchen floors until dawn, wondering how you missed the signs that now seem so obvious. When Thomas found that pendant, inscribed with words of love from a stranger to his wife of 43 years, his world collapsed inward. The discovery of Michael, the son he'd never known existed while grieving their supposed childlessness, cut even deeper. Perhaps you've experienced that special kind of betrayal that doesn't just hurt in the moment, but reaches backward, rewriting your memories, making you question whether anything was ever as it seemed. But here's what I've learned, watching Thomas navigate his impossible situation. Betrayal isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning of a different one. Those same hands that trembled with grief can steady themselves with purpose. The wisdom you've gathered over decades doesn't disappear when trust is broken. In fact, it becomes your most valuable asset. Thomas's investigative skills, dormant but not gone, became his pathway back to himself. Remember how Thomas stood in that boardroom, shoulders back, voice steady, facing down the powerful who thought him nothing but a grieving old man, easily dismissed. That moment waits for all of us who've been knocked down by life's cruelest surprises. The dignity isn't in avoiding the fall, it's in how we choose to stand again. I think of Thomas, sitting on his porch swing, months after the confrontation, watching evening settle over his neighborhood. The weight of betrayal hadn't disappeared, but it had transformed into something he could carry. In those quiet moments, with cricket songs rising from the garden Caroline had planted, he found peace, not in forgetting, but in understanding the complex, flawed woman he had loved, and in the unexpected connection with the son who carried forward his own passion for truth. Your legacy isn't what others try to take from you. It's what you build with the pieces left behind. On quiet evenings, when memories float by like fireflies, you might find that what seemed like an ending was actually a door. Thomas discovered family where he least expected it, purpose when all seemed lost, and strength he'd forgotten he possessed. So tonight, as you close this book and set it aside, know this: your tears are understood. Your pain is seen. The betrayals that have carved lines into your face haven't diminished your worth. They've simply marked the battles you've survived. And your capacity to begin again, to find meaning beyond betrayal, to create connection after loss, remains one of life's most beautiful mysteries. The story isn't over until you say it is. After all, as Thomas learned watching that evening star rise above his porch, sometimes the light that guides us forward appears only after darkness has fully fallen.